Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP married for 3 years. My wife cheated after a blossoming friendship turned into romance. Despite a seemingly perfect marriage, I discovered her affair with her boss. Confronting her and taking action, I exposed the truth to her boss's wife and her company, leading to her dismissal. Our divorce ensued, and I prioritized my peace over new relationships, wary of trusting again. Now let's get into the story. I was married to my wife for 3 years before she cheated on me. My wife and I were not strangers before we started dating, known each other through a charity volunteer organization we both joined. And even though we weren't friends initially, we used to say hi and hello whenever we saw each other. About a year after I joined the volunteer team, I realized I was heavily crushing on her, and this pushed me to get closer. We became friends and would go out together to eat after our volunteer sessions. From there, our friendship bloomed and my feelings for her grew. Long story short, after months of hanging out with each other, we started dating and we married after a year and 6 months of dating. In the 1 year and 6 months, I dated my wife. I believed I knew everything about her. We had opened up to each other about our past. She insisted we open up because it was important for our relationship and marriage, and I agreed. I told her about myself, my exes, and everything she needed to know, and she did the same. But some years down the line, I realized that she only told me the things she wanted me to hear. Before I learned that my wife was cheating on me, our marriage was beautiful and blissful. We were like Louise and Clark, loved each other so much, and I was always happy to be around her. My wife worked for a top marketing agency in our state and was great at what she did. At least I believed so because of the promotions she got, the increase in her earnings, and the bum uses. On my end, I worked as a business consultant, but my earnings were less than hers. For once, I was never jealous of her. Instead, I encouraged her to work harder and hit her monthly targets. It was even a relief on my end that she had a great job, and we could collaboratively take care of the bills, rent, and other expenses at home. While we were still together, she told me about how her colleagues in her office hated her for no reason, and I had even noticed the look on their faces once I had to drop her at the office. When she said this, I didn't think it was that serious, and I believed her colleagues acted that way because they felt threatened by my wife's success and the speed she used to climb the ladder. Also, my wife was one of those sassy drama queens that loved to draw attention or be the center of attention wherever she went, and she was a high-taste fashionista who loved to wear expensive things. So I thought it was also one of the reasons some of her colleagues did not like her. Most times, when she talked about it, we would laugh and joke about them, but it was never anything serious. We were so close that we talked about everything and anything that happened during the day at our different workplaces, and this helped us bond better. When we were dating, I knew my wife was a career-driven woman, and she always said she could do anything to be successful. Whenever she said this, I thought she meant dedication, working harder, committing fully to the organization she worked for, and the other attributes that could make anyone successful. I never knew that she would go as far as giving her body in exchange for success. I honestly believe she earned everything she got from her hard work and dedication to her company. The day I found out, I was cleaning our home office. In the past, it was always my wife that cleaned our home office, but she didn't have time to clean it for a while because she had been so busy with work. Also, our home office was in no condition for use because it was so untidy, so I decided to clean it up. After cleaning, I was trying to move things back and organize them, and that's when I stumbled on a hidden stack of gift cards and receipts for expensive jewelry and other stuff from an undisclosed source. Initially, when I saw them, it didn't make sense to me that they were hidden. I could tell they were hidden because of where I found them. But after going through the gift cards and receipts, I knew something was off. Before I made this discovery, I never questioned my wife about the expensive stuff she wore or bought. I knew she was earning well, and she loved things like that. I also believed she must have gotten most of them during discount season like she claimed. I knew I would do my own digging, so I returned everything to the position I found them, organized our home office, and waited for her to come home. When she came home, I welcomed her as usual, and we had our regular chats and gossip. Later that night, when she was sleeping, I went through her phone, and to my greatest surprise, I found out she had been sleeping with her boss. This was a shock, but after I went through their conversation, I understood why she got all the bonuses and promotions. I was angry and thought of the best way to pay her back. Then an idea came. Her boss was a very popular man in our state, and that was because his wife was a well-known real estate agent. I decided to find her online, and I got her direct contact in no time. The next day, I contacted her and asked that we meet. When she agreed, we met at a coffee shop, and I presented all the gift cards, receipts, and asked her if her husband gives her as much as he gives my wife. When she saw the screenshot of the text messages I had sent to my phone and all the receipts and gift cards, she was so mad and heartbroken at the same time. On my end, I forwarded everything to my wife's company HR, and after an investigation was carried out, she was fired and her boss was demoted. While all this happened, I confronted my wife and told her I knew she had been sleeping with her boss. At first, she tried to deny it and said I was beginning to sound like her colleagues. But after I showed her the receipts and chats, she began to cry and said she could explain. She said she had to sleep with her boss because she realized that hard work alone would not take her to the level of success she wanted, and that she did it for us. When she said she did it for us, I almost lost it. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and by this time, she didn't know I had forwarded everything to her HR. She found out after being fired and was forced to move locations to find a new job. After she moved out of my house, my next step was a divorce. So to make things more difficult for her, I made sure our divorce case was taken to court several hours away from her new workplace. Eventually, we divorced, and she is out of my life for good. I pity the next man she will end up with because she won't stop cheating on her future spouse until she gets the kind of success she wants. Meanwhile, never listen to what women say, especially about their past. My wife told me she had never cheated on any of her partners before and wouldn't do such a thing in the future. But she was getting favors and promotions in exchange for her body the whole time. I have no intentions of being in a relationship anytime soon because, at this moment, my peace of mind is my top priority. Today's second story. In this story, OP recalls his engagement-turned-nightmare when his fiancée's obsession with a lavish wedding unravels their relationship. Amid financial disputes, suspicions of infidelity arise. Hiring a private investigator confirms his worst fears, leading him to cancel the wedding, expose the affair, and end the relationship. Despite initial heartbreak, he finds closure as his ex-fiancée faces repercussions professionally and personally. Now let's get into the story. When I had 27 male met my fiancée 25 female 4 years ago, I knew right away that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She was everything that I had been looking for. We'd only been dating for a year when I proposed. We've been engaged for 3 years. The long engagement has caused some trouble for us. One of the biggest issues is that she wanted to plan her dream wedding, which subsequently would cost us quite a bit of money. I've never been one to care about superficial things like that. I would be more than happy going to the courthouse, signing some papers, then spending all of the wedding money on our honeymoon. However, she had always dreamed of her big day, and she wanted a big wedding with no compromise. It felt like every other week the budget we set aside for the wedding had increased, where she was telling me that she had gone over and was apologizing for it. At some point, I noticed that her apologies were meaningless because she continued to go over. We were getting into a lot of arguments, and there was a bit of resentment brewing between us. I'd had enough of her constant disregard for the financial constraints of the wedding, so I sat her down intending to have a calm, reasonable conversation with her. She was immediately very defensive and told me that she wasn't sure if she could be with someone who was controlling. I was upset that she had accused me of being controlling when all I was doing was standing up for myself when she was taking advantage of me. After the fight, She ended up leaving and staying at her friend's house for a week while we figured things out. Honestly, I thought it might have been the end for us. I was heartbroken. She was my dream girl, and I cared so much about her. She eventually came back, and we had a long discussion about the wedding. We both agreed that we still wanted to be together, but we needed to set some boundaries. We also agreed that we would move forward with what we had for the wedding and halt all further planning. That was the only compromise on the issue I would allow, since we were already over budget by 50% and had 150 people invited. We fell back into our old patterns with each other, and it seemed like our temporary break in discussion actually helped our relationship. The wedding was only a few months away, and we were doing well. As we got closer to the wedding date, some of the stressors started to come back for us. My fiancée's coping mechanism with the stress was to throw herself into her work. She's a graphic designer and very creatively inclined, so it helped alleviate the stress. So instead of being home with me, she was at work. She started spending more and more time at work. It felt avoided, which was unlike her. I was curious about why she was there so much, so I asked her one night when she came home. She just told me that it was a good way to escape and forget about all of it. I didn't understand why she still wanted to go through with the huge wedding, if it was stressing her out so much, but I didn't ask about that. Around the same time, I noticed that she was wearing more makeup and more revealing clothes to work. I had nothing against her dressing in a way that she felt confident, but she normally wore long pants, boots, and sweaters to work because she was always complaining about how cold she was while she was there. Suddenly, she was wearing sleeveless blouses showing cleavage and skirts. It was odd. I tried not to worry about it, but honestly, I've seen a ton of those. Am I the Jerk video and stories exposing cheaters, so a lot of the things she was doing were raising red flags for me. I needed to find out if something was going on before the wedding. I didn't want to be married to her, and then find out she was with an ex or something after we were legally attached. I did some snooping on my own, but didn't find anything. One thing I've always known about liars is that they're good at hiding their lies, so I justified hiring a private investigator to follow her. I reached out to someone who specializes in infidelity, and they agreed to take the case. I could only afford to pay them for a few days, because the wedding was depleting a lot of my savings. The first day, they didn't find anything. She went to work and went home with no issue. I thought that maybe I was overreacting, but my gut told me not to call the private investigator off. The next day, I was glad I trusted my gut. My fiancée texted me about midway through the day that she would be staying late at the office. She said that she was helping a coworker with some excess work they had before a due date. However, the evidence the private investigator brought back to me told a different story. They emailed me a file with videos and pictures of my girlfriend with her boss in his office. They were having intimate right on his desk, while other employees were in the office. I just remember staring at the computer screen until it turned itself off. I was so shocked by what I saw. When I collected myself, I started to think about my options. There was absolutely no chance I was going through with the wedding, but I needed to figure out how it ended. I wanted a little revenge on her for cheating on me. An idea hit me, so before I acted on it, I packed up some of my stuff and texted my brother to see if I could stay with him. When I got to his house, I drafted an email to our entire wedding guest list. In the email, I told them all it was canceled and attached the evidence of my fiancé affair. Surprisingly, I got several responses back from relatives, co-workers, and friends about it. What surprised me the most, which I didn't even realize at the time, was that my fiancé's HR manager was on the list. She reached out to me and asked about details because it was something she was obligated to act on because it was clearly on company property. I told her everything I knew. My fiancé figured out I was with my brother and came to his house, banging on the door. She was fuming at me, but I stood my ground and ended it. I told her I was contacting the venue, vendors, and everyone else involved in the wedding and having all of my money refunded to me. I felt bad when she was crying in front of me, but then I remembered how she cheated on me and I didn't anymore. She and her boss were both fired for their inappropriate relations on the job. She tried to call me and tell me that I was still obligated to pay for the apartment, even though I didn't live there, but I managed to work something out with the apartment complex to pay for 1 month and get off the lease. I think they were just willing to work with me because of the situation. My now ex-fiancée was forced to move out because she lost her job and couldn't afford rent on her own because she dumped what little she had in savings into a wedding that never happened. Today's third story. In this story, OP's marriage unravels when they discover their wife cheating with their own uncle during a family event. Gathering evidence, they expose the affair in dramatic fashion, leading to divorces and familial fallout. Despite attempts at reconciliation from the wife, he remains resolute in their decision to end the marriage. Now let's get into the story. My partner and I have been together for 5 years, though we had recently gotten married. We actually met on a blind date that one of our mutual friends set us up on. I was new in town and I didn't know anyone, so I jumped at the opportunity to meet someone. At the very least, I figured if there wasn't a romantic connection, I would possibly make a new friend. Though I was lucky when there was a strong romantic connection between my wife and I. She joked with me on the date that our mutual friend had always been trying to play matchmaker with her, but it never worked before. She spent the night, and from there, it was like she never left. We were completely inseparable from each other. I really thought that I found my best friend when I met her. That's what makes all of this so much harder on me. I was estranged from my family at a young age, and I had to work through a lot of complicated feelings toward them. My father was abusive toward me and my siblings, and I decided I didn't want anything to do with it. I was the only one to leave the family, and there was a lot of resentment toward me because of it. Even though I hated my father for what he did, there was still a part of me that loved him. It was very complex and hard to discuss with people. I shared everything with my wife, and she supported me through a lot of things early on in our relationship. About 6 months ago, I found out that my father had died. He was in a bad car accident, and it took the entire family by surprise. I was saddened by the news, but I also felt extremely guilty for having cut him off. My wife and I went back to my hometown to attend the funeral. While we were there, I was ignoring her a bit, not on purpose, but because I was very sidetracked with my familial problems. My siblings and my mother were very cold toward me after I abandoned them. We had a lot of things to work through, and I intended on trying while I was there. That left my wife alone in town for quite a while since we were there for about a week and a half. I never would have seen her. Suspected she was cheating on me at the time, but looking back there were a few things that I think might have been because of an affair. One night while we were in town, she didn't come to bed. I looked around the house for her, but I didn't see her anywhere. I called her to ask her where she was, and she told me that she needed to get out of the house and she was on a walk. I did wait up for an hour, but I was exhausted and I fell asleep before she got home. I might have been a little too involved in the other things going on in my life to question her about it at the time. But now I think that's where this all began. After we went back home, things still weren't the same for me. I was mourning the loss of my father, and I was really grieving the fact that I hadn't spoken to him in years. There were a lot of things I never said to him that I wanted to, and I felt like that chance was taken for me. However, since he was no longer around, I thought it might be good to try and rekindle a relationship with my family. My wife thought that was a good idea, and she encouraged me to spend more time with them. Throughout all of that time, she was far away from me. It seemed like helping me work through some of these issues was the last thing she wanted to do. It was surprising because she had been so supportive of everything that I told her when we started seeing each other. It felt like I was living with a different person at times. She spent more time away from the house too. She would go out with her friends, and it felt like she was avoiding me. One night, I asked her about what was going on, and she just told me that she felt uncomfortable dealing with death, so she had distanced herself inadvertently because of that. I felt slighted by that because she was supposed to be there for me, but I didn't want to push her away anymore. I started dealing with my things privately after that. Even after I stopped going to her with the issues, she was still distant and absent from my life. Clearly, what she had told me was a lie, because her behavior didn't change when mine did. I started to get suspicious that something was going on. It was the last thing that I needed to be dealing with at the time, so I thought I could ignore it. At least I thought I could do that. I was sitting on the couch next to her one night watching a television show, and I saw a number come up on her phone. I didn't recognize the number itself, but I recognized the area code. It was from my hometown. The only people she knew from there was my family, so I assumed one of them had called her. She rejected the call, and I asked her who it was. She told me that it was a friend from work. I asked her about where they were from, and she told me that they lived in the city. It wasn't impossible for them to have a phone number with the area code from my town, but I just didn't believe her. She left a few minutes later, taking her phone with her to no doubt reach out to whoever that was. She had been gone for about 10 minutes when I got up to go and look for her. We were in the middle of watching a television show together, so I was just sitting there with it paused waiting. When I found her, she was in her bedroom with her shirt off. I asked her about what she was doing, and she got kind of red in the face as if I had never seen her naked before. She told me that she splashed some water on her shirt when she was washing her hands and was just changing. I didn't believe what she said. My gut was telling me that there was something else going on. So later that night, I grabbed her phone while she was asleep and looked through it. Unsurprisingly, when I looked through her pictures, I saw several that she'd clearly just taken earlier that night when she was topless. I searched through her contacts for the number that had called her earlier, and I saw the messages between them. The number wasn't saved, so I didn't know who it was right away. They had been exchanging pictures and sexting with each other for weeks. It all started when we were in town for my father's funeral. I felt sick to my stomach seeing that, but it got worse when I finally realized who it was. Most of the pictures were faceless, but in one of them, I saw a tattoo that I recognized. She had been texting with my uncle. While I was home for my father's funeral, dealing with some of the heaviest things I had ever had to do, my wife was cheating on me with my uncle. He was my dad's brother, so it was even more disgusting that he was focused on sleeping with my wife during his funeral. I thought both of them were absolutely disgusting for their behaviors. I sent myself as many images and screenshots as I could. I would need them for our divorce hearings. I needed to think of something to do to get back at both of them for their actions. They deserved to be humiliated and have their lives turned upside down for what they did. My uncle was married, and he had 5 children. He threw all of that away to sleep with my wife. Now that I was talking to my family again, I knew that there was a birthday party coming up for my grandma. Everyone was going to be there, so I told my wife that I wanted to go, and she happily agreed to come along. I checked her phone a couple of nights after I told her, and she had set up a date to sleep with my uncle again. I was happy to see that. Originally, I had just planned on telling everybody about what happened, but if we could walk in on them in the act, that would be even better. The day of the party came along, and everything went well during the event. At the end of the night, we planned on renting one of my grandma's favorite movies and watching it together on a projector in the backyard. I know that my wife and uncle planned to sneak away at that time. When they were gone, I tapped on my aunt's shoulder and asked her if I could talk to her. We walked away from the movie and made our way inside to have a quiet conversation. I pretended like it was about gathering photos of my father to put together in a book for my uncle because I knew how close they were. She thought it was sweet. We walked into the basement together to look for the boxes of photographs that my grandma kept. As soon as we opened the door, we saw my wife topless straddling my uncle. Uncle. I played it off like I had no idea what was happening, and I had just stumbled in there just like my aunt had. There was a huge screaming match that ensued between my aunt and uncle. Then my wife tried to tell me that she had made a mistake and begged me to forgive her. I told her that we were done. Everybody else at the party heard what was happening, and they came down to see if everything was all right. They had to explain to everyone that they had been sleeping together before we caught them. Everyone was disgusted by their actions, especially my uncle's children. They were both kicked out of the house that night. Hopefully, they at least thought about how foolish they were. My aunt ended up divorcing my uncle and is now selling the house she was awarded in the divorce. She doesn't have to split any of the profit from that with my uncle. I ended things with my wife, and she got nothing from me. I had been burned by my family in the past, so I was smart enough to get a prenup. Every now and then, I was just a little bit more upset with my uncle. She'll text me when she's drunk and try to get back together with me. There isn't a chance in hell that I would ever do that.